Hey guys, Kory here with GillzGoneWild. We're here today to do a video and try to address what can be a pretty confusing situation for some people, and that is what kind of fishing line should I use to do a certain technique or in a certain situation. It can be confusing if you don't know what characteristics certain kinds of line have, and as you guys can see right here, we've got several spools of line set out, and I've actually got a great big tote that's just mounted full of different lines, different pound tests, and different kinds of line. And that's because there's different kinds of line, and it's think about tools. I mean, you wouldn't try to drive a nail with a screwdriver, right? So each kind of line is a tool that's got characteristics that make it excellent for doing some things and kind of a poor choice for doing other things. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. The first line we'll talk about is monofilament. This is most likely the kind of line that you probably started out fishing on. I mean, that's the most, it's the simplest line to use, and it's the kind of line that if you had to have one rod and reel set up to cover everything, if you only had one rod and reel, monofilament is probably the best choice of line for you, and we'll talk about why. The first thing with monofilament is it's got a lot of stretch to it. As a matter of fact, of all the different kinds of line, none of them have more stretch than monofilament. And by stretch, what I mean is when you set the hook on a fish, it's imagine kind of a rubber band. I mean, the line will stretch and give. That's really good for certain things. That's good for baits that are prone to that have real small hooks, prone to pull out of the fish's mouth and rip out of the fish's mouth. You want something as a shock absorber, if you will, between you and the fish. Either that would be either a really soft rod, like a rod that's got a really soft tip on it, or a line that's going to give, or maybe both, depending on the situation. Monofilament also floats, and in fact, behind braid, monofilament's the best floating line out there. Again, sometimes you want a line that'll float, like if you're fishing a topwater bait. Say you're fishing a Zara spook or a pop R or something like that. A line that floats is going to keep that bait up and give it a little bit more action than one that sinks. In fact, lines that sink can actually kill that action and basically just defeat the whole action of the bait altogether. So the things to remember with monofilament is it's got stretch and it floats. Those are the two really key characteristics. There's some others. I mean, it's when it comes to tying knots and stuff like that, monofilament is probably the simplest, but let's focus on the fact that it stretches and the fact that it floats. You wouldn't want a line that floats on a bait that you're trying to get as deep as possible. And mainly I'm talking about like a deep diving crankbait. If you've got a crankbait that dives to an honest 13 feet on a long cast, if you're wanting to get that 13 feet out of it, you're better off going with a line that sinks, like a fluorocarbon, and we'll get to that in a minute, than a monofilament, because as that line floats, it's gonna restrict a little bit how deep that bait's capable of diving. Now, if you're talking about a Texas rig soft plastic or a jig or something, it's somewhat irrelevant. It doesn't really factor in as much, but just remember that baits that like a topwater bait, monofilament can be a really good choice for that because of the fact that it floats. Also, if you're talking about baits where you're prone to ripping hooks out of the fish's mouth and you need some stretch, monofilament's also a good way to go there. Let's talk about fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is opposite of monofilament in a few ways. The first way is that it's got virtually no stretch. I say virtually. Fluorocarbon does have a little bit of stretch, but not very much, and fluorocarbon also sinks. Both of those characteristics make it a great choice for stuff like a jig, or like if you're dragging a football jig, or a Texas rig soft plastic. It can be a great bait because the lack of stretch is going to give you more powerful hook sets, whereas you're going to get some stretch with monofilament, which can rob you of some of that power. Fluorocarbon also, being that it sinks, that's my preferred line for a crankbait, and the reason being is because I want to get every foot of diving depth that I can get out of those crankbaits most of the time. There are times where a crankbait really wants to dive a little bit too deep for what I'm trying to do, and in those instances I might go to a monofilament to help hold that bait up and keep it just a little bit shallower. But just remember fluorocarbon, very little stretch, and it sinks. So it would be a terrible choice for something like a Zara spook or a topwater bait, because the fact that it sinks is going to just defeat the action of that topwater bait, and you're not going to get any action out of it at all. So just remember that. Another thing with fluorocarbon is the fact that it's nearly invisible. I say nearly invisible. They're not. You hear conflicting theories. A lot of people say, well, it's not visible at all. Other guys claim it is. But I will say that it is a lot less visible than every other kind of line out there. So if you're in clear water where line visibility is an issue, fluorocarbon's another good way to go because of the near invisible qualities of it. So that covers monofilament and that covers fluorocarbon. So let's talk about copolymer. And copolymer is kind of a hybrid of the two, being that copolymer essentially is a monofilament line that's coated with fluorocarbon. So you get some of the characteristics of both of them. You get a little bit of stretch like you get in monofilament, but not quite as much, it seems like. In my experience, it seems like copolymer doesn't stretch quite as bad as monofilament, but it stretches a little bit more than fluorocarbon. So if you're looking for a middle of the road there, copolymer is a great way to go. Copolymer also, and it probably depends on the brand, but copolymer also seems like it's a lot more forgiving than fluorocarbon. You'll probably hear guys talk about, well, fluorocarbon's got so much memory, it's hard to deal with on a spinning rod or a bait caster or whatever, and there's some ways around that, and we'll do a video to show you guys some tricks on that. But the bottom line is, with copolymer, you kind of get some of the important characteristics of fluorocarbon without giving up too much. You still got the good characteristics of monofilament as well. So it's kind of a best of both worlds deal. It's not a end-all, be-all line. I mean, it's not an all-around line, but it is a line that fills. If you had to pick one line to fill as many voids as possible, and you didn't want to go with monofilament, copolymer would probably be the way to go. It's great on crankbaits, it's great on Texas rig soft plastic, stuff like that. So basically you can kind of take what you really like about both of these lines, and for the most part you can get that in copolymer. Another kind of line that's not up here on the table is braid. Braid is the most unique line out there in that if you were to look at it, if you're not familiar with braid, it's obvious where the name braid comes from. It's basically what it is this braided line, and it almost looks like really small rope, if you will. But braid, the thing to remember about braid is braid has got zero stretch, none at all. And so it's got no stretch, which makes it very good for techniques where you need the most power you can get in a hook set. Things like flipping, especially in heavy cover, vegetation, stuff like that. Braid also is a high floater. It floats better than any other kind of line out there. So it can be a really good line to use for a topwater bait, like we said earlier with the Zara spooks and stuff like that. But I prefer, and I do use braid for my topwater baits, but I prefer to use a monofilament leader, and that's a story for another video. We can get into that later. But just remember that braid floats really high, so you can get a lot of action out of your topwater baits with it if you use it wisely. It is the only line out there that I'll use for things like a frog, mainly because of the action. Because the line's got no stretch, the power that on the hook set that the frogs require. And when I'm talking about frogs, I'm talking about stuff like the spro frogs and the hollow-bodied frogs. They require so much power on a hook set, and generally those bites come in some bad places. Places like bushes and grass and behind boat docks, places where you need to move a fish out of it as quick as you can, and no line's going to do that better than braid will. Braid, if you're really concerned with line visibility, braid's probably not the way to go. It's a very visible line. However, I haven't really noticed braid having that big of an impact on the number of bites I get. So, and there's different theories on that. Some guys swear that line visibility matters, other guys don't, and I'm somewhere in the middle. But another thing about braid is it is extremely, extremely sensitive. Fluorocarbon is a very sensitive line. You can drag a jig over bottom, and with a good quality rod and fluorocarbon line, you can tell the makeup of the bottom. You can tell whether it's sand or it's mud versus rock or pea gravel. And braid is like fluorocarbon amplified when it comes to the sensitivity of it. I mean, you can drag it over a beer can and tell what brand it is. That can be good and bad. That can cause you to set the hook on a lot of stuff that's not bites. But it also is a great way of detecting light bites, as well as coming across some areas, you know, and you're feeling the bottom, and you can find a lot of key features that you may not know is there. Maybe you find a rough patch on a gravel flat, and that keys you into, well, that's a shell bed or something like that. So there's good and bad with all different kinds of line, and I just want to do a quick video and introduce you guys, if you're not familiar with them, to the different kinds of line out there, and explain a little bit about what makes each one good for a good choice for certain techniques. And it can get way more complex than that. We can do a whole video on each kind of line and still not cover it all. So if we didn't cover any questions that you guys might have on a specific kind of line, by all means email us and let us know. We'll try to do another video and directly address your questions. But anyways, for now, that'll wrap up our introduction to different kinds of line and a brief explanation of them. So for more product reviews and how-to videos, head on over to GillzGoneWild.com and check us out. Thanks.